Good afternoon, Canada. Welcome to another True North Report. My name is Andrew Lawton, fellow with True North, here for another one of our weekly updates, broadcasting live on Facebook, or if you're seeing it after the fact, we are here from the live stream's digital grave, where you get to partake in all of the glory and splendor of the cast just without being able to ask questions live. But you can still watch it, so whether you're tuning in live or tuning in after the fact, it's good to have you. Thanks very much for watching in the heat of the summer, which certainly I think has been worse depending on where you are. I think we had a minus 40 degrees, like what it is in probably Alberta right now. But we had a plus 40 degree day, I think a little over a week ago, but we're back to like a good, nice chilly and breezy plus 34 today. So that's all good. Regardless, thanks very much everyone for tuning in. I want to expand today on a video that I did yesterday, a little 2.5-minute video, which was really just an immediate reaction to the news that Gerald Butts was back. And I think that the first question that I asked, and I think that a lot of Canadians asked when we saw the news that Gerald Butts was taking on a senior role with the Liberals, was, did he even leave in the first place? Because no one really bought it. And I certainly talked about it in, I think, a pre-recorded video or even one of these live videos, that I didn't believe he was going anywhere. And I believe, and I don't want to claim that I was totally the oracle, but I'm pretty confident that I even said at one point he'll be back in time for the campaign. And I recall thinking it. I think I said it. I hope I said it, because if not, I'll sound like really ridiculous, just pretending that I've predicted something with perfect accuracy. Doesn't happen often, but it does happen from time to time, because I was confident that he'd be back in time for the election, because Justin Trudeau does not even know how to tie his shoes without Gerald Butts. So I certainly don't think he knows how to win an election without Gerald Butts. I think the question was always going to be how visible was Butts going to be in what he was doing, not whether he'd be doing something in the first place. And this brings us to what's been happening in the Prime Minister's office going back to July. It was in May. Thank you very much. Maggie's my new favorite person today. Maggie says, "You did say that, I heard it." Okay, good. So Maggie is proof that I said at some point 4 months ago or 5 months ago that Butts will be back in time for the election. So I'm not crazy. I appreciate it. Thank you very much, Maggie. I'm even going to give you a like as my show of gratitude, which took very little effort, but it's all I can do right now. So thank you. So there we go. It's Maggie Dick approved that I did predict this months ago. But again, it also wasn't that ridiculous or contrived a prediction, because, as I mentioned, Trudeau does not know how to do anything without Gerald Butts there. So what I assumed would happen is that he'd become a little bit more of a behind-the-scenes guy, more than he was already. What he has done instead is decided to embrace with gusto his new role. And the Liberals, again, were very proud of his return. The Liberals were very proud of his return. It was a party official saying that he's going to play a role. And they weren't hiding it. They were not at all secretive of it. They were saying that he's going to be a great member of the team. And it shouldn't be a surprise. You know, Lauren Gunter had a great column in The Sun where he said, he asked the same question I did. Number one, did you really think he was gone? And number two, are you really all that surprised he's back? And Gunter arrives at his conclusion through very similar means to my own, which is that Trudeau and Butts have been friends for years. He managed Trudeau's leadership campaign. He managed the Liberal campaign. He managed the election. And then he served in the Prime Minister's office. So the connections between the two are not at all surprising to people. Where I come in here with my frustration is the brazenness of the Liberals in bringing him back after he, quite honestly, resigned in disgrace. He resigned amid scandal. Gerald Butts was one of the two people who was really fingered out by Jody Wilson-Raybould as being responsible for trying to pressure Jody Wilson-Raybould into taking a particular decision to settle with SNC-Lavalin as part of its ongoing prosecution. So Jody Wilson-Raybould says, yeah, I was definitely pressured. It came from Butts and it came from Michael Wernick. Now, as far as Michael Wernick is concerned, he was the one that she had audio of. That audio tape of their phone call where she's saying, listen, I'm not comfortable with any of this. And he's saying, well, you know, the prime minister's in a get it done mood, so get it done. She didn't have that with Gerald Butts, but she did have contemporaneous notes and records of meeting with Butts, of talking to him. Butts tried to say, oh, no, this never happened. But, you know, ultimately this whole thing came about because Trudeau had his two henchmen, Gerald Butts and Michael Wernick, try to put pressure on the supposedly independent Attorney General. And that was how the SNC-Lavalin scandal started in the first place. What Butts' return indicates is that this operates with impunity, and that no one has faced any penalty or punishment for this. Gerald Butts, even when he resigned in February, said he was doing so without any acknowledgement or admission of wrongdoing. Just that, well, you know, I didn't do anything wrong, but, you know, maybe, just maybe if I'm around, it'll be a distraction and I'm leaving. But no, I didn't do anything, but I'm leaving anyway. Which was less believable. I mean, if you didn't do anything, just stick around. And Michael Wernick, same thing. He said, oh, no, the political opposition has made it so that I can't effectively do my job. So he blamed his critics instead of looking inwardly at his own conduct and his own actions. And Wernick and Butts were very similar in that sense, whereas they said, oh, no, everyone else is the problem. Everyone who criticizes us of doing things is the problem. Everyone who blames us for our complicity in this is the problem. And the Prime Minister's office, the Privy Council office, all of the people in these offices, squeaky clean. And then it became the he said, she said, Jody Wilson-Raybould versus Justin Trudeau. But Justin Trudeau does not weather this without Gerald Butts. He doesn't weather this without Gerald Butts making the calculation that I've got something has to give now. Because in January and February, there was sustained and relentless interest in this case. In July, there isn't. It is not surprising that Butts decided to return or announce the return during the summer months. No one's paying attention to news in the summer, and more importantly, the election is still just shy of 3 months away, which means Butts' return is literally a one-day news story right now that everyone's going to forget by the time Civic Holiday on Monday rolls around. People won't care, people won't know. And by the time the election rolls around, no one will even care. It'll be Gerry who? And that's the way he wants it. So what Butts has accomplished here is not difficult, but it is very shrewd because he's made it so that there's going to be a little blip of criticism and then everyone moves on. And the reason everyone moves on is because everyone has gotten over the SNC-Lavalin scandal. And this was the thesis of the video that I put out on this yesterday. And I had a little bit of negative pushback from people on Twitter that were accusing me of saying that, well, they were basically accusing me of making it so that the SNC-Lavalin thing should be old news. And I'm saying, no, I don't want it to be old news. I'm saying that it is. I'm taking an analytical stand and saying that this is, in fact, old. Canadians have moved on. Canadians don't care. And what was so interesting about this case is that it was the biggest scandal in Canadian politics in quite some time. Certainly the biggest scandal of Justin Trudeau's premiership. And I'd say it eclipses and outpaces the Bahamas vacations, any broken policy promises. This was the big scandal that Justin Trudeau had to weather. Bigger than any scandal that Stephen Harper did. I'd say bigger than ad scam going back to Geoffrey Etienne. So this story should have been enough to disrupt the political discussion, maybe even disrupt an election had it happened during the election, but it didn't. It happened 10 months out, 9 months out. And in politics, that is a lifetime. And I said in a column that I'm writing on the subject here, which will be out pretty soon, that 3 months away for the election might as well be 3 years away for a lot of voters because people fundamentally aren't paying attention. So I'm not glad. I'm not glad that SNC-Lavalin is old news, but as a Canadian who cares about it, who cares about politics, who pays attention to this stuff, I have to accept that it is. And the Liberals know that it is. The Liberals know that people have moved on from it, which is how they can justify bringing back Gerald Butts, who resigned in the midst of the SNC-Lavalin scandal the first time around. I want to read a snippet here, if I may, of a National Post piece written by Brian Platt. And the headline, Liberals gamble that bringing Gerald Butts back for election campaign is worth reviving SNC-Lavalin scandal. And he says that, Gerald Butts is back, the Lav scamsters are reunited, and nothing has changed. That's a quote from Pierre Poilievre, who added, if Trudeau and Butts are returned to power, we will see more SNC-Lavalin scams. The modus operandi that we saw in this scandal will continue, and it will worsen. For the Liberals, bringing back Butts, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's longtime friend, confidant, and indispensable advisor for the election campaign, is a gamble that his political skills are worth the cost of giving the opposition parties the gift of resurrecting the scandal. But I think the devil is in the details here, in that this article quotes Pierre Poilievre doing a press conference about this. How many Canadians do you think know or care that Pierre Poilievre has condemned this? Jagmeet Singh has condemned it. Andrew Scheer has condemned it. Pierre Poilievre have. I mean, the condemnations are irrelevant to most Canadians, and they are footnotes to a story that itself seems to be a bit of a footnote in Canadian politics right now. And when you want to understand how Lav Scam, which is a great name for it, quite frankly, but how the SNC-Lavalin scandal became a footnote, you'd have to understand a bit about how people in Canada that are outside of the bubble, that are outside of the group of us, which is a small but dedicated group that just live for this stuff and immerse ourselves in this. But you have to, I guess, ask the question of how on earth something so big could go by the wayside. And the answer to that is simply that people don't live and breathe politics. They don't. I'm convinced that if something happens in week 1 of an election campaign that's damning to a party, that people will have forgotten it by week 3, let alone by election day. And even something huge like this, it may take a little bit longer for people to get over, but people will in fact get over it. And I'm not happy that my prediction ended up being correct. I'm not happy that my prediction ended up being something that came to pass. I'm not happy that Canadians forget about this thing and it was just old news. But this is the reality. And there was a story in my own city. I'm from London, Ontario. And I was hosting a radio show in London, a daily show, and the mayor of London at the time was having an affair with his deputy mayor. And this is like the political incest world coming to roost, where the mayor and the deputy mayor both cheat on their respective spouses. And this was a big story. It is. I mean, there was an breach of trust, an abuse of power. There was an integrity commissioner investigation, all of this. People were calling for the mayor and the deputy mayor to resign. People were outraged. And then a few weeks later, nothing. And probably about 4 weeks after the story, or maybe even 2 months, but it was in that range, CBC London ended up publishing a story that was a follow-up to it, that was saying, it seems like, despite the mayor claiming that, he and his wife are working through it, they've actually called it splits. That was the story. And the backlash that people put on CBC for that was insane. It was insane. And the reason was that people had moved on. It ceased to be outrageous and shocking to people, so any update at that point just became gratuitous. And that was that. And people actually not just moved on from the story, but pushed back against anyone that kept it alive. So if we were to, as a conservative-minded media organization, and I use a small c, not a capital C there, start talking about SNC-Lavalin, I don't think people would be all that outraged. But if CBC or the Globe and Mail or the Toronto Star were to keep going, their readers, their viewers would likely push back at them and say, come on, we've heard that it's old news now, we've got to move on for the good of the country. And this is how people are. This is how politics works. And I'm not saying this to be condescending or patronizing. I'm saying it to tell you what we are up against. I think we do need to keep it alive. I do think that even if you sound like a broken record bringing it up, you've got to bring it up. But we also have to be wary of the idea that most Canadians just don't care anymore, or at least don't care enough that it's going to sway their decision one way or another. It's not going to allow Andrew Scheer or Maxime Bernier or Jagmeet Singh to coast to victory just because of the scandal. You've got to do a lot more than that. And the Liberals are aware of this, and them bringing back Gerald Butts to run the campaign or to take a senior role in the campaign proves they're aware of this, because it proves that there is, in fact, a recognition, if not an endorsement, of the idea that no one cares. But I think the Liberals want to think that they've dealt with this. And that's where the Liberal arrogance bothers me here. I think the Liberals would love nothing more than to say, and probably are thinking, oh yeah, we apologize, it was a little blip, we've moved on. And Canadians cannot give them the courtesy or the gift of having that. Canadians cannot let them get away with that. Maggie writes again, and Jody is still gagged, is she not? Yeah, I mean, Trudeau let her speak her truth about a few key issues, but she said there's a lot more that she wanted to say and couldn't because of things that happened outside of the pertinent window. And there were people that were saying, well, you know, she could probably say more anyway. Whether that's true or not, she was under the perception, or at least relaying the perception to Canadians, that she had more to say. Trudeau could have, with a stroke of a pen, let that happen and didn't, which suggests that Trudeau may be afraid of what was going to be said. Rhonda writes, did SNC not just get awarded a contract to fix water problems in Northern Ontario? I don't know about a specific contract, but I do know that it is business as usual for them. And this is why I argue that they long ago should have been banned from bidding on federal contracts, given how many issues they've had with corruption, criminal charges, allegations of criminality. The idea that they are still operating as a private company, fine. The idea that they're operating as a private company that's getting millions of dollars, or at the very least hundreds of thousands of dollars on certain government contracts, is unconscionable. And no one, except for Charlie Angus of the NDP, was prepared to raise that discussion. So I thank you for bringing that up, Rhonda. Doesn't surprise me. Let's see. Darren writes, you're right, Andrew. Canadians by and large seem politically ignorant and apathetic. I fear the socialist fabric of our society has lulled people to sleep. Well, whenever there's a vacuum of knowledge, liberalism and socialism tend to thrive. They thrive when there's no thought. I mean, that it sounds like I'm being mean, but it's the reality that any mentality that is based in groupthink, and I'm talking about the major progressivism, any mentality based in groupthink will thrive when you can't have any individual thought or knowledge. And this is why free speech is such an important issue. But the SNC-Lavalin case is relevant and pertinent to that dialogue, because no one wants to be the one that risks standing alone to say, hang on, I won't stand for this. Because remember, let's go back to the Bahamas vacation. I say Bahamas vacation, you know what I'm talking about. Trudeau vacationing on the billionaire Aga Khan's private island, taking the private air travel, a different vacation that his wife took that Trudeau wasn't on. I mean, this is, again, the stuff that was the subject of an ethics commissioner investigation and an ethics commissioner's finding of guilt. An ethics commissioner's finding that Trudeau became the first prime minister in the history of the Confederated Canada to violate federal law while in office. He paid a fine that was a slap on the wrist. I think it was like $500. And this is something that no one talks about now. No one talks about it. And if Andrew Scheer were to run up there and film an ad that was airing on television, an ad saying, oh my goodness, and can you believe that he vacationed on the private island of the Aga Khan and broke the ethic, people would shrug. People would shrug. So as much as we may want to blame political leaders for the issues we're seeing in Canadian political discourse, you have to blame, as Darren writes, voter apathy as well. And I don't blame people, by the way. You know, if you're a middle-class suburbanite or someone living in rural Canada, whether you live in downtown Vancouver or you live in, rural Quebec, or you live on an acreage in Alberta, whatever the case may be, you've got a life to live. You've got jobs, you've got commitments, you've got family things. I mean, most people do not have the benefit that I do of being paid to consume the news, talk about the news, write about the news, analyze the news, break the news. Most people can't do that. And I get that. And some people really are interested in it. They're news hounds. Most people, it's barely enough to get them to check the weather. That's hard enough every day. They're not going to get immersed in reading, multiple page reports on, someone in Ottawa doing this. And that's the reality. So how do we fight back against apathy? I think the big question is, how do we make people understand how these things are relevant to them? And this has been something that I've tried to do in the past when writing about government debt. When you say that in the case of Ontario, which just had a recent election, that the Ontario government had a debt level that cleared $300 billion. That's such an abstract number to people. How do they put into terms they can understand what a $300 billion debt is and why they should care about it? And if you say that the province has had, $290 billion debt and $280 billion and all of that, and people think, all right, so what? Clearly it works. Well, you have to tell them the impact it has on them. And in the case of debt, the more you spend on debt maintenance, which I think in Ontario's case was the third largest, or is the third largest line item in the budget between healthcare and education, you tell people every dollar you spend on debt is a dollar that's not going towards hospitals, schools, roads, social services, tax breaks, whatever the case may be. And I was a candidate in that election. That message does translate to people. People do understand that. But you have to tell them how it's relevant to them. You have to tell them how it matters to them and what the impact is on their lives. SNC-Lavalin, same sort of thing. Everyone beats up on the 1%. Trudeau beats up on the 1%, and the far left doesn't like, big corporations and multi-billionaires. Well, here we have SNC-Lavalin, which is a giant multi-billion-dollar company. That is the 1%. I mean, SNC-Lavalin is the 1%. And instead of condemning the 1%, as Trudeau loves doing when talking about tax policy, he decides to get into bed with them. With a company that has broken the law and had many of its officers break the law on numerous occasions, whether it's bribing officials in Libya or whether it's illegally funneling money to mostly Liberals here in Canada. Internationally, the only thing consistent about this is that internationally, they tend to break the law and get away with it. And the tragic reality is that lawlessness has not been met with condemnation by the federal government. Stephen Harper has to shoulder a bit of this as well. I mean, the illegality of this company has been going on for quite a length of time, and they were getting government contracts under the Liberals, the Conservatives, the Liberals again. So I do think that the Conservatives could have done a lot more to nip this in the bud. At the same time, I also realized that it didn't reach a boiling point. There was no catalyst to look into SNC-Lavalin during the Harper years like there has been in the last little while. And it would go a long way if Justin Trudeau were to stand up and say, you know what, this company does not have the right to bid on federal contracts anymore. Instead, it was taking lobbying meetings. The government was putting representatives of the Ministry of Finance and other government departments and the PMO in the same room with SNC and doing nothing to stop this company's pervasive influence in the federal government. The only person who put a stop to it is Jody Wilson-Raybould. And what does she get? Kicked out of cabinet. That's her reward for standing up for due process and the rule of law, getting kicked out of cabinet. And when she tried to sound the alarm about this and did, ultimately getting kicked out of the Liberal caucus. Now, Jody Wilson-Raybould is running as an independent, as is Jane Philpott. I think it's going to be very fascinating to see what happens in those ridings. I'm not optimistic about Jane Philpott because she's in a battleground riding. I think Markham Unionville's the name. Jody Wilson-Raybould's in BC, where really weird things tend to happen in politics. BC politics is just a kind of a unique animal in and of itself. They have elected 2 Green Party MPs, and it's entirely possible she may, on name recognition and a good ground game, win and be reelected as an independent MP, which would be quite amazing because she's not accountable to the Liberals anymore. She's accountable only to her own conscience, to her creed and ethos, and also to her voters, to her constituents. But the reason I bring that up is because she really is the anti-Trudeau in so many ways. I mean, Trudeau said he was going to be a leader on Aboriginal issues. Here's an Aboriginal woman who's sidelined by the Liberals. He says he's going to be the first feminist prime minister. Here's a strong woman that is sidelined by his government. He says he's going to run a new type of politics that is focused on honesty and openness and transparency. Here's a woman who's fired for speaking out about the rule of law not being followed. And he says he's going to have an open door. And here's a woman, again, has concerns, and she ends up getting kicked to the curb and removed from her position as Attorney General because of speaking out with those concerns. And she's still a liberal. I mean, any conservatives that were saying, and I made this point back then, that, you know, she should cross the floor and join the conservatives, that would be a terrible idea. She's not a conservative. She's a liberal. She's on the left side of the Liberal Party. She's a very progressive person. But she's a woman of integrity and a woman of conscience. And if she were to stand up with that integrity and with that conscience and win as an independent, I would support her type of person, that type of person being in politics. Especially in BC, where, you know, in Vancouver, Granville, the Conservatives aren't going to win anyway. So if you're going to get a Liberal or an NDP, I'd rather someone who has a demonstrated track record of doing the right thing and of speaking truth to power than someone who's just your garden variety shill that will go along with whatever the party leader says and whatever the Politburo demands. So that is going to be the choice for people, and she may well be rewarded. But she's going up against the Gerald Butts approach. She's going up against the smooth political operator that is the departed and now revived advisor, Gerry Butts. And here's a guy who, again, I don't want to fall into this trope of, oh, Justin Trudeau's dumb and Justin Trudeau's an idiot, because he is capable of imposing his agenda in Canada. He has been doing that. So you can't just shrug him off and laugh at him, even when he looks ridiculous doing his little Bollywood bridesmaid thing. Trudeau legitimately has impacted the Canadian political system. So even if you do laugh at him, he's done a lot. Gerry Butts is the one to credit for a lot of that, though. Gerald Butts is the one that you can bring a lot of these major legacy moves by Trudeau and put them in Butts's lap. And that is where most Canadians need to know who this guy is. I'd say probably don't know who he is, because we're not, again, to go back to the divide between insiders and outsiders, the average person couldn't even name their local MP necessarily, let alone naming this guy who occupies this position they've never heard of in the Prime Minister's office, on the other side of the country in Ottawa. And that's the reality. So this is what we're up against. Am I optimistic? No. Am I still hopeful? Yes. I see a message from Joe here that says, Jody Wilson-Raybould is not as ethical. She's slightly more ethical than her Liberal peers, and that's all. If she was ethical, we would have the whole story by now, and she would have laid a criminal information against the offenders. I'm assuming you mean a criminal charge. Well, no, she's tried to give the whole story. This is the problem, Joe, is that she is barred by law because of solicitor-client privilege and cabinet confidentiality from giving the whole story. So Trudeau needs to, and again, he could do it very easily. He already did it for a slight snippet of time. Could say, all right, you are hereby released from this confidence, and you can talk about what you want. And as far as laying a charge, remember, she was removed from the post of Attorney General. And it's not clear that anything illegal happened. It's very clear that things that were unethical happened. It's not a given that the law has been broken. I know we were talking about this, and Leo Knight talked about this a while ago, True North fellow Leo Knight, about the definition, the plain text reading of the criminal code charges on interference in a prosecution. So there is a possibility, and you want to hope that law enforcement has investigated that. But that was never her job as a politician to lay a charge. That's the job of the people who do that, the police and the law enforcement community in Canada. But she risked a lot. She risked a political career she could have had for years to come to stand up for what's right. So I am going to say she's as ethical as people suggest, because if you're prepared to put principles above personal ambition, that is, I think, a pretty good indicator of having a strong moral compass. So I still, again, have a great deal of respect for her, even if that comes with disagreement on a great many political issues. That's all we have for today. I want to give a big thanks to all of you for tuning in. We will have lots more, I'm sure, of this in the coming days and weeks, with just less than 3 months from the election. But I hope you all have a great rest of the week. Thank you, God bless, and good day, Canada.